Okay, so reviewing for test number 1, which is happening next week. There's a really weird open tile up there. Okay, cool. So reviewing for test number 1, which is happening next week for everybody. If you're in an in-person section, you will take the test during the time of your class. If you're in an online section, the times that it is happening are posted on the window that I just closed, which is the schedule window. And I don't remember it. So that's working out well. It's going to be an awkward video. The online sections tests are from noon Monday to something or other. All right, this is where you get to your schedule. If you have no idea, that's bad because it's week 5. But on the schedule, the online section is noon September 26th through noon September 27th. For the Tuesday, Thursday people, it's during your Tuesday class. For the Monday, Wednesday, Friday people, it's during your Monday class. Okay. All right. So the first thing to be aware of is in your D2L shell, underneath content, there is a section called test prep. If you haven't found it over here on the left-hand side, you should probably go there. Inside of there, you'll find a test 1 study guide, as well as a test 1 practice exam. That is not what I'm going to go over today. So that's another exam that you can look at so that you have something else to practice. The study guide looks something like this. It basically lists out all of the topics in each of the modules. So the test is going to cover modules 1, 2, and 3. Module 1 was the review of 1321. Module 2 was when we talked about the static keyword, passing by value, passing by reference, returning information back from a method, and garbage collection. And then module number 3 was what we just spent the last 3 weeks talking about, which is the object-oriented inheritance, abstract classes, abstract methods, interfaces, polymorphism, and all of that stuff. So that's the list of what's going to be on the test. There is nothing that we haven't covered. It's not like there's any weirdness in the schedule. So it is up through and including all of module number 3. All right. When you go to take the test, the quick reminders are make sure that you're going to get the test in D2L. Make sure you go there before time. If you're in an in-person section, like physically in this room, then the test will actually open 30 minutes before the lecture starts. So this class is at 6:30 p.m., so your test will open at 6 p.m. It will also remain open for 30 minutes after the class closes. So normally the test or this room ends at 7:45, so it will go till 8:15. This does not mean you have to take it during all of that time. So if you have another class before or after this, hopefully not after this, but if you have another class before or after this, it doesn't conflict. You can take it anytime during that time period. We're just giving you a little bit of flexibility so you can start a bit earlier or end a bit later if you absolutely have to. For the online folks, you have a 24-hour window. It's noon to noon. You have to start it within that time. So regardless of what your window is as to when you're taking the test, make sure that you don't take it at the very end of the test. I went over this in the last class, but very briefly, if you have a problem during the test and for whatever reason you have to reboot your computer or go back in, it will only let you do that if you are still within the test window. So if you start the test at the beginning of the window, let's imagine your window opens at 6:30 and you start the test at 6:30 and something goes wrong at 6:45, you would be able to restart your computer and go back into the test. And life would go on and you would lose a few minutes while it's rebooting, but everything else would be fine. If you decide to leave it until 8:14 and you start the test at 8:14 and something goes wrong at 8:16, you're done, you get a 0. There's no repairing it. So do not leave it till the end of the window, start the test at the beginning of the window. Make sure that you understand that when I say start the test, I don't mean begin the Respondus setup. I mean literally press the button that says start quiz. Before you get to that button, you've got to show your ID and take your picture and do the environment check and all of that other stuff, which takes 4 or 5 minutes. The start quiz button that you get after all of that is the actual thing that has to happen within the test window. So if you, again, leave it till the last minute before the window is about to close and you try to start it, you're probably not going to be able to take the test. You're just going to get an error when you press start quiz. So start it at the beginning. You should be able to do that. You have no conflict. The whole reason you registered for this class was so that you have no conflict at this time. So do it during the class time and life will be good. And for the online folks, don't leave it until the last minute, which I know you're going to. Okay, if you have a problem during the test, you have a couple of options. The first option is live with it. And I know that doesn't sound like a great option, but it is legitimately an option. If your computer suddenly starts to become slow or it suddenly is having some kind of an issue, if it's workable, the right answer is just live with it and move on. If you have a problem where you cannot live with it. The mouse stops working, the keyboard stops taking input, and you literally cannot do anything. Then your next choice is to reboot the computer. You may actually have to press the power button in order to get out because the test won't let you out until you're done. So if you have to do that, reboot the computer, come back up, log back into D2L, click on the quiz, and you should be able to pick up where you left off on the quiz. It automatically saves as you're going through stuff, so as long as the computer was functioning part of the time, everything up until the point where it stopped functioning is there. If that happens, you must explain to me on the camera what just happened. Because normally, the rule is, and I will say this very clearly, if you leave the test for any reason, if you are off camera for any reason during the test time, you get a 0. Period. No questions asked, it's a 0. You cannot leave the test once you start it. So if you need to pee, poo, puke, or do anything else, do that before you hit the start quiz button, because for the next hour, 60 minutes, you need to be right there in front of the camera without leaving. So if you have to reboot your computer, you need to explain to the camera why you had to do that, and we can see from the logs what was going on. The computer is recording everything that's going on. In addition to what we can see on the video, we can actually see diagnostics about your computer, so I can tell what just happened. So make sure that you explain to us in detail why that happened, otherwise you get a 0. All right, so that's the rule on that. The other thing that you have to do is, if for some reason something goes horribly wrong and you cannot complete the test, your power goes out in your house in the middle of it, and you cannot get somewhere in time in order to complete the test, you must email me within 15 minutes of the end of the test and tell me. If you email me 2 hours later and say, I had this problem, blah, 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 tough, the answer is you get a 0. If you email me within the 15 minutes and there's some circumstance that I can validate, then I will possibly, and I do underline possibly, allow you to retake the test. The default answer is no, you don't get any makeup. No, we don't let you redo it. In almost all circumstances, I'm going to say no, but if there's some provable situation that happened during the test and you tell me within 15 minutes of the end of the test, we might be able to do something. In order for us to consider it, you have to open a ticket with UITS. The phone number for UITS is in the description. As you start the test, there's a description on there that you'll be able to see. And down at the bottom of that, it tells you what I'm just telling you right now, but it also includes those phone numbers for the KSU Help Desk and the University System of Georgia's Help Desk. Either one of those, you can open a ticket with them. If you do not have a ticket, the answer is no, you get a 0, no matter what the problem is. You might say, well, if I have no power and I have no internet, how am I supposed to do this? You still have a cell phone, and the cell phone probably still has internet connectivity. And if it doesn't, you can get somewhere within the 10 minutes where you do have cell phone service. All right, so that's your only option. If something goes horribly wrong, you have to let me know. If you are going to mail me and say, I forgot to take the test, I didn't realize it was this time, the answer is going to be you get a 0. So for everything that goes wrong, you get a 0. Maybe if you opened a ticket and you told me within 15 minutes and it's a legitimate circumstance, we might work with you, but in almost all cases, the answer is no. So make sure you take the test and you plan accordingly. You have a working computer, you've rebooted the computer before you start, you close everything on it, you lock your parents, your dogs, your kids, and everybody else out of the room so you're not interrupted, and you take the test for 1 hour. And that's how you do it. All right. It's just like if you were taking it in a classroom, you know that if you get up in the middle of a test and walk out of a test, you don't get to come back in most classes, right? Same thing here, even though you're in your own private space. All right, so those are the rules of all of that. Make sure you follow them. The only thing you are allowed to have with you is your ID, which you need to have. You have to show the ID to the camera before you start. It needs to be your KSU ID. If you don't have one, a driver's license or a passport or another state-issued ID is acceptable, a military ID, something like that. But if you don't have any of those things, you cannot take the test. So you actually have to have an ID. So make sure you know where your ID is and find it before you get to the test day. And likewise, with regard to the other things you can have with you is a piece of paper and a writing implement of some form. You are not allowed to have your cell phone. You don't need a calculator. You don't need anything else with you. If you are seen on camera using anything else, or even if there's a hint that you are using something else on camera, you will fail the test, period. All right? So it is you, the test, piece of paper, a pen, and your ID. Nothing else should be in your environment. Nothing else needs to be there. You cannot look anything up while you're taking the test. You can't look at old tests. You can't look at your assignments or anything else. It is just you and your knowledge in the test. All right, those are the draconian rules. Any questions about any of that in the room? All right, sounds good. So make sure you know when your test is. Make sure you take your test at the appropriate time and you know what all the topics are, because that's what's posted in the D2L shell. So what I'm going to do for the rest of the time today is I'm going to give you an example of the test. This is the practice test that's posted in your D2L shell. It is a test where it is asking you to write code. There is no writing code on the lecture test that you are taking this week. The lab test that you are taking next week is all writing code. But to be fair, if you can answer these questions, you can answer multiple choice questions about them. But what I'm going to show you in lecture today is a set of multiple choice questions that are similar to the multiple choice questions that you're going to get on the test. All right, so that's what we're going to do. And so, as I say, the test is probably going to be about 30 questions. We reserve the right to be plus or minus 1. The first question is going to be an acknowledgement question where it's going to ask you to acknowledge the rules of the test. Make sure you have read them. They're the same rules that are posted before you open the test. You get 1 bonus point for doing that, so your grade will be out of 101, where the 1 is a bonus point. So it's out of 100, but you can earn 101 if you get everything correct. All right, so all of the questions are multiple choice. That is not to say that they are simple, so you definitely need to make sure that you understand the topics, otherwise you will not do well. So here's an example of a question. The following code will not compile as is. It is missing a line which needs to be inserted where the / missing line comment is. Which line of code will fix the compiler? And then there are 4 options presented below. In many of these cases, we'll present you the code in both Java and C#. Those are the 2 languages of the class. It is the same code that we are giving you on both sides. So if you're a C# student, just look at the C# one. If you're a Java student, just look at the Java one. There are differences between the languages. Don't sit there and try to puzzle why they're different sometimes. It's just a syntax difference between the language. I've had people who told me that they lost 20 minutes on the test because they were trying to figure out why there was no scanner object on the C# side. It's like, well, there is no scanner in C#, so that's why it's not there. So just look at your own side of the code. All right, so this question has a class house, and the class house has a bunch of attributes. It has a public int square foot, stories, and it has a constructor which sets the square footage and also the stories. All right, so that class has a bunch of public attributes and a public constructor. Down in main, we have a variable that is declared to be of type house, which is the class we just had called h1. And then we have a missing line, and then we're saying h1.squarefootage equals 1. So the question is, why will this not compile? What is wrong with this? And the answer is, even though you declared a variable for house, which is what's happening right here, that is making a variable called h1, which is of type house. You've still not actually instantiated a variable on that, or instantiated an object on that variable. So h1 right now is null. You've made a variable, but there's nothing there. You know that the new keyword is what you need in order to actually instantiate a variable. So if we look through our choices down below, we can see that new house h1 is one option. So that's perhaps plausible. h1 equals new house. That also is using new, so that's also plausible. The other 2 are doable. You could certainly say h1.stories if you had an object and you'd be able to call the constructor, I suppose, maybe, sort of, but none of those are fixing the problem. So your choices here are choice 1 or choice 2. And in this particular case, the correct answer is going to be the second one here. h1 equals new house. You have to instantiate an object in order to be able to actually access any of the attributes or any of the methods inside of the house. All right. The way I went through that is probably what you should do as you're going through the test. Start off, take a look at what the question is asking for. Make sure you understand what it's asking for. It's not that we're intentionally trying to mislead you, but we have people tell us all the time, well, I didn't know you were asking what was missing on that line. It's like, what's right there in the instruction. Make sure you read the actual question and understand it before you go picking answers. The other thing is, if you have spare time at the end, I would highly recommend that you go back through the questions and make sure that the answer you selected is the one you think you selected. Strangely, every semester, probably 10 people email me at the end of the test and say, on question 3, I meant to press C, but I pressed B. Yeah, well then, we're going to grade the C. There's no, you can't email me and tell me you meant B. That's not a thing. If you meant B, press B. If you meant C, press C. All right, so make sure you understand which button you're pressing. All right, any questions about that question? That one pretty clear to everybody? All right, question number 2. Which of the following blocks of code will successfully ask a user for a number, multiply that number by 2, and print the result? All right, so in this case, we're giving you 4 blocks of code in each of the languages. So starting off on the first block of code, we ask the user to enter in a number. So we have a print asking the user. Then we have a declaration of a scanner if we're in Java, or we have a read line that reads something in. So in Java and in C# in this first block of code, and to be clear, I'm talking about this one. Oh, there is a massive delay from when I draw to when it actually happens. All right, I'm talking about this one. You can see that it's reading in a line. All right, so in Java, it's doing myscanner.nextLine. In C# it's doing console.readLine. Both of those things give you what data type back? A string. Okay, so the problem with the next line is you're taking a string and trying to do star equals 2. And that's not going to work because you can't multiply strings by 2. So that's not how that works. So the first one is not going to work because you're reading everything in as a string. All right, so let's take a look at the second one. In the second one, we're doing a myscanner.nextInt in Java, and over in C#, we're reading it in as a string, and then we're using int32.parse to convert it to an integer. So in both of those cases, you now have an integer that is actually valid, and you're able to do a ×2 on it, and you're printing out your number doubled is num. It looks like the num that's being printed out is the same num that we multiplied by 2, and as you know, doing a star equals is the equivalent of telling it to do a multiplication of the original number. So the line that says num star equals 2 takes the original value of num, multiplies it by 2, and stores it back into num. So this second one is correct. That will read in a number, and it will successfully multiply it by 2 and print out the result. The third one that's in here, just for the record, has a different problem, which is you have a myscanner that reads in a next int, and that looks like that is correct. The problem that you have down here is what? What is wrong with this one? Oh, it's never stored. The number that you get back out of the next int is never stored into the variable num. So num is declared at the top. It will be 0. On the line where num star equals 2, it's still going to be 0, and so that's not going to work. All right. Question number 3. What does the following code output? X is 7, Y is 10. All right, so the first statement says if X is greater than 5, all right, 7 is greater than 5, so far true on that. And Y is greater than 12. Okay, well 10 is not greater than 12, so we're left with true and false. And when you add those together, true and false gives you false. All right, so that first statement is not going to happen. But we have an else if here, so it's going to move on to the next block. And in the else if it says if X is less than 7 or Y is greater than 10. Okay, well X less than 7 is false. That's still not true because 7 is not less than 7. But Y greater than 10 is also false. So actually that's wrong on both sides. So false or false is still false. All right, our next one is X less than or equal to 14. That's true. And Y greater than 2 is also true. So it looks like this is going to print out C. All right. So with an if, else if, only one of them is going to fire. That's how that works. It starts at the top. It tries to evaluate it. If it's true, it does that. And then it stops looking at all the other ones. If it's false, it moves on and tries the next one. Remember that when you're doing an if, else, only one of them will ever fire. And it's the first one from top to bottom that it's going to check. Had these all been if statements instead of if, else ifs, then multiple of them could have fired. But once it's an if, else if, only one can fire, right? Questions about that one? Everyone good? All right, number 4. What is the output of the, okay, that needs to be cleared. What is the output of the following code? All right, so we have a Boolean, A is false, B is true, C is false, D is true. All right, so we're going to have to work our way through this because there's a bunch of stuff happening here. So the first thing that happens is the thing that's in parentheses in the middle. Actually, I guess the first one that would happen is the parentheses around the A, which seem completely superfluous, but they are there. So we'll do the ones that are around the A, and A is false, so I'm going to put an F right above that. We're next going to do the parentheses that are around B or C. All right, B is true, C is false, so true or false is going to be true. All right. After that, we're going to do left to right with the and statements. So we have false and true. So false and true gives you false. And then the last one is false and true, which is still false. So in the end of all of this, that evaluated to false. The whole thing. So So since the if statement was false, it's going to fall through to the else statement, and it's going to print out no. So the correct answer here is no. This does compile. There's no compile issues here, and that was one of the options. So you need to look through it and see, are all the semicolons there? Are all the parentheses matched? Does everything look okay on that? And to my eye, it does, unless somebody else sees something else that looks weird. That all looks syntactically correct to me. Okay? So make sure, especially for any that give you a do not compile option, make sure you actually look at that and see, does it actually compile? Because that is a thing. Yeah?
Could we just look at the D? Since anything ended with false, it's going to be false.
Okay, so the question was, could you have just looked at the D and only realized that since the D was false, well, the D was true to start with.
Okay, never mind.
Yeah, so your question is still valid, which is anything and false is going to be false. Yeah. So in reality, would the computer have actually evaluated all of this? No, it wouldn't. It would have shortcutted its way through it, because since A is false and A is being ANDed to something, it would never actually evaluate the things that are in parentheses there, because it would see false and whatever, it's going to be false. There's no point in even checking it. So it would actually shortcut its way through that and give you false. Since there are two ands and one of them was false hard-coded, the answer is false. You could actually quickly tell that. But I would recommend that you check all the bits yourself, even though the computer can shortcut it. Just make sure you understand what's going on. So the order of precedent here is anything that's in parentheses is done first, and then everything else is read left to right. The ors are done before the ands, and other than that, it's read left to right. Okay? Yeah.
Nots are before orders too, right?
Nots are before ors. Ors are before ands. Everything else is left to right unless there's parentheses. All right. Question number 5. The following code will compile and output 8, true or false. All right, so we have a class stuff, and stuff seems to have a public int that is equal to 7. The int is called x. All right, so there is a variable inside of stuff called x. Its value is 7. It's public. Down in main, we say stuff.x is equal to 8, and then we print out stuff.x. Will this work?
No.
The answer is no. Why?
You never instantiated an object.
The object was never instantiated. Okay, so if this class were declared as static, this would work. Because then I would be able to declare static stuff.x is equal to 8, but the class is not declared static. Anything that's declared static, you can access it with just the class name. But if it's not declared static, you have to actually instantiate it to be able to use it. Nowhere in here did we say stuff, my stuff is equal to new stuff. Then you would be able to say my stuff.x is equal to 8. So the idea of the code is good, but it will not work because there is no object created. You've declared a class, and you've never actually instantiated an object on it.
What if the variable was static and the class wasn't static? Could you still call it like that?
If the variable and the class were both static, you would be able to access it like this.
So both of them have to be static.
They would both have to be static, yes.
Okay.
Yep. All right. So the answer to this one is false. It does not compile and output 8. It just doesn't compile, quite frankly. All right. What is the output of the following code? All right. So we have an array list or a list, and those are created. It looks like the array list is of integers. The list is of, actually the thing on the right is an array list in C# as well. Okay, this is obviously an old question. We wouldn't use an array list in a modern question. But okay, so an array list of integers, and then we're adding into the array list or the list 10, 20, 30, and 40. All right, so if we do that, then the first cell of the array list has a 10 in it, the second has a 20, the third has a 30, and the fourth has a 40. So the array list is going to look something like this. I need a pen. Give me a pen. Okie dokie. Hey, there we go. It did draw it eventually. All right. So the array list effectively looks like an array. We put 10 into the first cell. We put 20 into the second cell. We put 30 into the next one, and we put 40 into the last one. Yeah, that looks good. All right, so that's basically what the first few lines did. Now, it is an array list or a list, so it could grow dynamically, but effectively that's what's in there. The next thing that we have is a for each loop. In both of the languages, that's how you do a for each loop. And the for each loop says X is going to be the variable, and we're going to go through my numbers being the array list or the list. All right, so what the for each loop does is it takes whatever's in the first cell and it assigns it to X, and then it goes through whatever code is between the curly braces. So the first time through the curly braces, and the curly braces I'm talking about are these. Sure, that worked well. Let's select a pen and try that again, shall we? All right, there we go. The curly braces are from there to here. Okay, so it'll go through and it'll take the value out of the first cell of the array, which is 10, and it will do everything that's inside of those curly braces. Num is a variable that starts off as 0, so what it's doing is it's adding to num, which is currently 0, the value of the first cell, which is 10. So the first time through the loop, num becomes 10. It then goes up, and the for loop automatically pulls the second cell out of the array list and assigns it to X, and we go back through the curly braces again. So on the second iteration, X is equal to 20. The num is now equal to 10, so 10 plus 20 is equal to 30, and num is now equal to 30. We go back through again. At this point, X is 30. Num was 30, plus 30 is going to be 60. And then we go back up again. X is now equal to 40. 60 plus 40 is equal to 100. And so at the end of all of this, it prints out the current value of num. So that's going to print out 100, which turns out to be one of the options down below. All right, so this question is checking that you understand how arrays, array lists, or lists work with regard to adding stuff in there. They are added into the first cell. So the first add puts it in cell 0, the second puts it in cell 1, and so on and so forth. And it is also checking that you understand how a for each loops work. Because honestly, I know a lot of you, when you went through for each loops in 1321, and also when we briefly covered them here, you kind of nodded and smiled and said, I'll always just use for loops, but you actually do need to understand how they work. So make sure you go back and review them if you have decided to ignore them. This is a reasonable question to look at. All right, question number 7, clearing the screen real quick. We have again a class stuff. All right, our class stuff this time has a static int x, which is equal to 7. And then it has a static doStuff method, which seems to change the value of x. And it prints out the value of x as well. All right, so down in our main method, we say stuff.doStuff. All right, so the question here is, can you do that? Okay, so most people in the room are saying, no, you can't do this, but you are incorrect. Because the method doStuff is declared static, the static is the key word here. Because the doStuff method is static, you are allowed to call it directly on the class name. The class name here is stuff, so you can say stuff.doStuff. That is only because the method is declared static. So the static keyword makes it so that you do not have to instantiate an object, because the static keyword means that something is spread across all of the objects of that class, which is effectively saying it's spread across the class, not across the objects. Once you say something is static, it's for all of that class. So the static x is across all of stuff, and the static doStuff is across all of stuff, so you can simply say stuff.doStuff. He was first, and I'll come to you.
Okay, so you said for variables, even if they're declared statically, the class also has to be static. But it's not true for methods. So if the method is declared statically, the class doesn't have to be declared statically in order for you to call it.
Yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, I think I lied to you earlier.
Okay.
I don't think that, I don't think the class does not have to be declared static in order to do this. The method and or the variable has to be declared static, but not the class. I don't know why I said that a minute ago, if I'm being honest. Okay, so let me rewind. 5 minutes ago, I said that the class and the variable have to be declared static for that to work. That is not true. Just the variable and or the method have to be declared static in order for you to use it like this. Was that your question as well? Okay, what was your question?
Would it be similar to like when you use methods from the math class?
Yes. So the question is, isn't this similar to how using methods in the math class works? And it is. You do not have to say math, my math equals new math, my math dot square root. You can simply say math with the capital M dot square root. And that has worked without you ever having to instantiate the object. And the reason for that is the square root method is declared static in the class math. So anytime something is static inside of a class, you can access it without declaring an object of that type.
Would this still work if x wasn't static?
Would this still work if x was not static? It would not compile. In a static context, you can only access static variables. Because if you think about it, if there's a shared variable across all dogs, and you try to change it if every dog has its own name, and you say dog.update name, which name are you updating? It doesn't make any sense. So it has to be shared across all of them, therefore it has to be a static variable for this to even compile.
So what's the purpose of using the static modifier on the class?
So the question is, what is the purpose of using the static modifier on the class? And the answer is, for this class, what we told you is, don't worry about it. The only time you will ever do it is when you have a class inside of another class, which is something we'll look at in the last week. So I'll get there, but I'm not going to do it right now. Yep. Other questions? All right, cool. All right, moving on to question number 8. Okay, so I think you guys are probably starting to see from these questions, you need to carefully read them. The static keyword is something you could easily overlook at a quick glance there, and it makes all the difference as to whether that question works or not. So make sure you're staring at the question for a moment and reading it and actually understanding what it's telling you to do. All right, question number 8. What is the output of the following code? So this time we have a class main, and then we have a bunch of methods. All the methods inside of main are going to be declared static. That's normal. If you're inside of the main method or the main class, you will always declare everything static. All right, your main method calls doStuff7. Okay, so the key point of this question is there is multiple versions of doStuff. So we would say that doStuff is an overloaded method. There are at least 4 versions of doStuff written here. All 4 of those methods have the same name. They also have the same return type. They're all returning void. But the reason that you're allowed to do this is because they have different parameters in their parameter list. The first one expects 2 integers, the second one expects 1 integer, the third one expects a character, and the fourth one expects a Boolean. So the way that the compiler works is it's going to look at your code and it's going to try to match the type, the number, and the order of the parameters with the best method that matches. So starting at the top here, doStuff7 is passing an integer. So the first method is looking for 2 integers. That can't possibly work because it's in violation of the number of parameters. So that one's not going to get called. The second one is the one that's going to get fired because it's expecting a single integer. So the first statement, doStuff7, is going to print out hi from doStuff2. Okay? And it's because you're passing an integer to a method that's expecting an integer. The second call is making a call to doStuff and passing it a character C. You know it's a character because there are single quotes. Had it been double quotes, it would have been a string, but it's a single quote C. So therefore, we're passing a single character. So that's going to return hi from doStuff3 because that's the one that matches that. And the last one says doStuffTrue, and true is obviously a Boolean. So that's going to cause hi from doStuff4. So you're going to get hi from doStuff2, 3, and then 4. That's what this is going to output. I will also mention that the order in which the answers come to you is randomly being picked by the computer. So if you're thinking that we wouldn't have put it as the first answer or you're in your head about where we would have put the answer, don't. It's completely random. Every one of you is getting it in a different order. So don't try to read into the order of things or we wouldn't have given you all A's. Yes, we would have because it's randomly picked. So don't think about stuff like that. Questions on this one? Okay, so it is absolutely possible to have multiple methods with the same name. In order for that to be valid, each of them must have a different set of parameters, not a different return type. The return type is irrelevant. There could be one in there with a different return type. That is not used in determining which overloaded method is called, only the parameters. And specifically, it's the type, the number, and the order of parameters that are being passed.
Can you overload with return type and access modifiers like that?
No. So the question is, can you overload with the return type and the access modifiers like public or private? And the answer is no. There cannot be two methods that have the same parameters, period, regardless of what else is different. Same name, same parameters.
If they have the same name, with different parameters, can you change the access modifier of that specific method?
Okay, the question is, if you have same name, different parameters, can you change the access modifier on it? Can you have one that's public and one that's private? And I believe the answer is yes.
You said that you can't have the same parameters, but if you never call one of the methods with the same parameters, will it still compile? Or
Okay, the question was, I had said that you can't have two methods with the same parameters. Even if you don't call it, is that allowed? And the answer is no. It will not compile if you have two methods with the same parameters. So doStuffInt and another doStuffInt, regardless of the types of return, regardless of the access permission, that will not compile. But doStuffInt, character, doStuffCharacter, int, no problem, that compiles. Those are two different orders. So the number, the order, or the types of the parameters, any combo of that is fine. This can lead to problems because you might have a circumstance where you want a method that takes in a name and an address, and they're both strings. And you might want to create another version that takes in an address and a name. You literally can't do that. Since they are both strings, you can't have two versions of it because the compiler couldn't possibly know which one you wanted. Therefore, it doesn't allow it. So overloaded methods must have different types, numbers, or order of parameters. Okay. Other questions on that one? We good? Question number 9. Given the following code, which of the below definitions for a child class chocolate bar is valid? Hint, pay attention to the access modifiers of the attributes in candy bar. Okay, so we have class candy bar, and candy bar has a private double cost, a private string manufacturer, and a private string name. All right, so 3 attributes, all 3 of them are private. We have a constructor, which takes in a C, an M, and an N. Those appear to be the cost, the manufacturer, and the name. And we have a method called getCost, which simply returns the cost. Okay, so inside of here, we're just seeing candy bar. And so the question now is, which of these options is the one that is valid? So the first one says, class chocolate bar extends candy bar, private string chocolate type, public chocolate bar takes in a double, a string, and a string. All right, so it's setting the cost equal to C. So the question is, can chocolate bar, in this example, see cost as a variable? And the answer to that question is no, it cannot. Because cost is declared private up at the top, the child class has no access to cost. So it is not possible in that constructor to access cost, manufacturer, or name. It would be allowed to access chocolate type because chocolate type is local in that lower class. So very specifically, the first 3 lines would cause compile errors, but the last line that says chocolate type equals milk is going to be just fine because chocolate type is local to that class. Even though it's private, that class sees it because it's local. So the rules of private are only your own class can access it, see it, modify it. The rules of protected are you and your children can access it, see it, and modify it. And the rules of public are everyone can access it, see it, and modify it.
You can still say this, that's super, and pass in the C.
Okay, which is probably going to be one of the other options. So yes, the correct way to do this is that the chocolate bar class constructor should call super or base, depending on which language you are, to call the constructor in the parent, because the constructor in the parent does have access to cost, manufacturer, and name. So there should be a call to super or base is probably what we're looking for. So let's go down and see what we got next. Hey, look at that. All right, so in class chocolate bar here, we have a private string chocolate type. We have a constructor that takes in 3 things, and we have a call to super, and then we set chocolate type equals to milk. Or we have a call to base in the C# side, and that sets chocolate type equals to milk. So that is valid. This is the correct answer. This one is completely valid. You would be allowed to do that. So this is how you correctly set private attributes. The parent candy bar has private attributes that no one should ever be messing with. The only way to really change them is through setters or the constructor. The constructor is this case And at the time that you're creating the chocolate bar, you would call the constructor telling it to tell the constructor and its parent to pass those attributes up there. All right, so just taking a look at the other one, this third option will not compile because the call to super and base is only passing one parameter. So in order for that to work, there would have to be a constructor up here that only takes one parameter. And there isn't. The only constructor that we have up here takes 3 parameters. So I can't call super or base and pass one parameter if there's only a constructor that takes 3 parameters in the parent. It has to match. And the order, the type, and the number of parameters all must match. Otherwise, it doesn't work. All right, so the call to the parent constructor has to be a valid call. And that is the last one of those, right? The last one appears to be the same to my eye as the previous one, so I'm guessing I copied and pasted wrong when I pasted this into the document. But either way, yeah. Okay, questions on that? Yeah.
Does super strictly have to be on the first line to inherit classes constructed?
Okay, the question is, does super have to be on the first line of the constructor in the child? And the answer is yes. If you try to put any code before super, it will not compile. This is why, again, C# probably did it right. They moved the base call directly up onto the header because you can't have code before the header. So if you see in the C# side, you give it the header of the constructor, and then literally after the header, you say :base, and you tell it how you want to call the parent's constructor. Constructors are fired from the top down. So if you're going to do something like this, it's going to make a call to the parent, who then make calls to their parent, and eventually at the top, object will fire, and then in this case, candy bar will fire, and then finally, chocolate bar will fire. All right. Question number 10, what is the output of the following code? So we have a class A, which has a method doIt, which prints out A. It's a void method, and it is public. We have a class B, which extends A, or inherits from A, and it has a void doIt as well, but it's an override, and it prints B. All right, so down at the bottom, we have, of course, a polymorphic thing where we say A, my class equals new B. So this is polymorphic because we're using a variable, my class, which is of type A, but we're instantiating on it a B. All right, so the question is, when I say my class.doIt, what's it going to print? The options, of course, are going to be A or B. So the answer to this question is that you're going to get B. And the reason for that is, even though the type of this variable is my class, sorry, the type of the variable is A, which is the parent, because I made a new B, I'm going to see the overridden method in B. Very specifically, I'm going to see the closest override if I go backwards up the tree, because there could be more than 2 layers here. I could have an A, a B, and a C, and there could be an override in B, and the question could have asked you, what happens if you call it in C? And the answer is you'll see the override from B unless C also has an override, in which case you'd see the override in C. So it works its way backwards from the bottom of the instantiated object all the way up to test. The other part of this that might make you grimace a little bit is, would this even have compiled? Because that's the question that we usually ask when you see the polymorphic thing. Because if you remember in lecture on Tuesday, we looked at casting and we said sometimes it won't compile because it can't check it. In order for this to compile, it's going to check that class A does indeed have a method called doIt, because the type of the variable is A. So therefore, A must have a doIt, which it does in this case, so life is good. The compiler is going to compile that. But if there were a circumstance where A did not have a doIt and B simply had a doIt, which wouldn't be an override in that case, it just had a doIt, then this code would not compile, because the compiler would have checked that A has a doIt, but the runtime would run the doIt in B. Problem is, you have to get through the compiler to run it. So the compiler would not work in that circumstance. Yep.
In your hypothetical scenario with the C, it still inherits the doIt from A. So why wouldn't it call the method in C? Why wouldn't it print out A?
Okay, so the question is, based on my hypothetical A, B, and C, even though A had, let's assume all 3 of them have a method called doIt. It's originally written in A, B has an override, and C has an override. The question is, wouldn't you be able to see the one that you inherited from above? And the answer is no. At the time that the method is overridden, the previous version is no longer visible to that child. So when B overrides A, the A method is gone. when C overrides B, the B method is gone, and the A method has already been gone by the time you get there. The only way that you can call the previous one is to use super. So inside of the C override, you could say super.doIt, in which case it will call the parent doIt first and then do whatever you tell it to do. But it would do the B's version in that case. Yeah. All right. Other questions? Yes.
What if you cast the my class to an A?
Okay. If you cast my class to an A, nothing would change because it already is an A. Now, I think what you probably meant is what happens if you cast it to a B. It would still, nothing would change. It would still be okay. It would still work because ultimately it's going to run the 1 in B either way. But if you had a compile error, because there was no doIt in A, casting it to B would solve the compile error. Yep. Other questions? All right, sounds good. Question number 11. Why does the following code not compile? Okay, so we have a public class XYZ, and it has a private int mynum. And in the constructor, we're setting mynum equal to 0. We have an overloaded constructor that takes in a number and sets mynum equal to that number. So to my eye, that all looks completely valid. The class has opening and closing curly braces. Each of the methods have opening and curly braces. It appears that we have 2 constructors, so we have an overloaded constructor, so all of that looks fine to me. All right, so our next class down below it, public class ABC extends XYZ, or inherits from XYZ. All right, so in this one, we have a private int num2. Inside of our constructor for ABC, we're trying to change mynum equal to 0. Okay, and that's right there where we're going to have a problem. So in both of the constructors for ABC, we're trying to access mynum. But the problem is mynum was declared in XYZ as a private integer. Since it's a private integer, ABC cannot see it. There is no variable called mynum as far as ABC is concerned because of the private declaration. If you change private to public or to protected, this would work. But as it stands with mynum being private, that doesn't work. The other part of it is fine. Num2 equals 0. That's not a problem. And num2 equals num1 times 2. All of that is completely fine. Down in the main, you're instantiating an ABC on an ABC, and that looks fine as well. That would be doable because ABC is not abstract. It's not an interface, so it's instantiable, and you're storing an ABC on an ABC, so life is good there. Okay, so ultimately the problem is mynum is defined as private in XYZ, and as such, it is inaccessible in ABC. The other options were ABC cannot have private attributes because it's inheriting from XYZ. That's nonsense. Each class along the way can have as many attributes as it wants, and they can be public, private, or protected. There is no rules about that. Class ABC is not allowed to inherit from class XYZ. Also nonsense. You can always inherit unless, you can always inherit. There is no unless to that statement. And then the last one is you cannot instantiate an object of type ABC. You can only instantiate objects of type XYZ. Also nonsense. None of them are abstract. Questions on that one? All right. Question 12. This time we're doing it with a UML diagram. According to the following UML, if a new object of B is created in main, my B equals new B, which of the following statements is not valid in main? Okay, so assuming that you have made a my B and it is holding a B, which of the following can you not do? So I'm just going to scroll down a little bit. Actually, I'm going to get rid of that little toolbar if I can. All right, so myb.doBstuff. All right, so doBstuff is a public method, and I can tell that because there's a plus sign next to doBstuff. So I can call doBstuff in B. That's all completely valid, and there's no real problem there. doBstuff1, actually, very specifically. So life is good on that one. I'm pretty sure that that first statement will work fine. The second one is myb.doBstuff2. Likewise, it's the same as the first one. It is also public, which is going to also work. No problems there. myb.dostuff1. Okay, so dostuff1 was inherited from A. And since in A it is marked with a plus sign, it was public, so therefore I would be able to call myb.dostuff1. So to be clear, I inherited doStuff1 from A. It's not listed in the B diagram because it came down through inheritance and it was not overridden, but that does mean it is usable. So it's public up above, therefore I inherited, therefore I can use it, life is good. So it looks like the last one is going to be wrong. The reason is because I'm trying to call doStuff3, which I also declared up in A, but the problem is there's a minus on front of it in A, which implies it is private to A. Therefore, it does not move down through inheritance, therefore B would not be able to see it. So this is an example of a method that's declared private in A, which is completely valid. You can do that. There's occasionally times you would want something that only A can call. You don't want the children messing with it. Kind of like your parents, I'm sure. All right, questions on that one? Everyone good? All right, question number 13. Given the following interface, which of the following classes will compile without error? So we have interface iMove, which declares a public void move forward int speed. All right. So we have a method called move forward. It takes in one attribute called speed, and it returns a void. So the question is, which of the following will compile? So class move character implements iMove, and it has a public int position, and it has a public void move forward int speed, which seems to do something with the position using the speed. That seems plausible.
Well, since this is an interface, these are all abstract methods, right? That means none of these can have it. None of these methods can have a body.
Okay, so the question was, since this is an interface, none of these methods can have a body because they all have to be abstract, right? And the answer is no. In the interface, there can be no body. So in the top part of the question where it says, given the following interface, there cannot be curly braces where the semicolon is after public void move forward in speed. The interface cannot have a body, but any class that implements that interface must put a body on there, or it must pass it on to a child. If the class is not going to put a body on there, then it has to be declared abstract. All right. So the first one of these is valid. We have a class, move character. It says it's going to implement the interface, and it successfully implements the interface. It creates a method called move forward that returns void. It takes in an integer just like the interface says it's supposed to. So therefore the contract is met and the first one is valid. So the first class will compile without error. So let's look at B. Class B, our class move character implements iMove. It has a position, and this time it only implements a method called move backwards. Okay, B will not work. It said it's going to implement the interface iMove, but it doesn't declare a move forward, and it is not marked abstract. Therefore, that is illegal. Once you say you're going to implement the interface, you must implement the interface or be abstract and let your children deal with it. But in this particular case, it's not abstract, it's a concrete class, and it's not meeting the contract, so B will not compile. All right? Looking at C, that's the example that I just gave. C declares an abstract move forward, and the class is declared abstract. C will compile. Now, you still can't use move character. You can't instantiate it, but that is valid to compile. You're punting. You're saying, I'm going to implement this interface somewhere in this tree, but it's not necessarily going to be me that implements it. So C will compile. Do we have a D? We have a D. All right. In D, we also are implementing the interface, and we still have a public int move forward. Okay, the difference here is we have a public int move forward instead of a public void. The interface says it's supposed to be a public void. You did not implement a public void. You did not meet the interface contract. Therefore, we will not compile.
If that class had a child, would that child need to have the interface thing put in there, or is it just implied that it also needs those methods?
Are you asking about C or D?
C.
Okay, so the question is, for option C, if there's a child of move character, we'll call it class move character slowly, which is an extension of move character, does it also need to state that it's implementing iMove? And the answer is no, it does not. The interface can be declared anywhere in the tree, so anybody along the way can say that they're going to implement the interface. By the time you get to the concrete classes at the bottom, somebody somewhere along the way must have actually implemented it. but each person does not have to say they're implementing it. It's inherited, just like everything else down the tree, that interface is above. So effectively, the contract is set at whatever level says it's going to implement it, and the contract must be met by the time you get to the bottom of the tree at a concrete class. Good question. Yep.
So does that mean that you could take out in C the abstract public void forward and it would still compile?
Say that again.
So for C, if you took out the abstract public void forward,
would it still compile? Yes, it would. Okay, so the question is, in option C, if you didn't say abstract public void move forward, would this still compile? And the answer is yes, it will still compile. The abstract method is implicitly there because it's an abstract class and there's an unmet contract from an interface. It knows that has to be there, but it doesn't require you to type it out. You would probably want to type it out to make it clear to anyone looking at your code that you understand that that's still outstanding, because otherwise a class that could be 20 layers lower would suddenly not be able to be instantiable because of a contract from 20 areas above. So each one would probably say I'm punting, so that it's clear that at the lowest one, when you look at its parent, you can tell that it was punted from above. But technically, does it have to be there? No. Okay, so whatever the answer was to that, A was valid, B was not valid, C was valid, and D was not valid. So it looks like it's A and C. So option number 3 is the correct answer to that. That's a case where your piece of paper might be very helpful. As you're going through it, just mark down which ones are valid so that by the time you get to the bottom, you can remember what you just spent 5 minutes figuring out. All right, given the following class definition, which of the following lines is a valid example of polymorphism? Okay, so we have a class animal, we have a class dog that extends animal, and then we have a bunch of options. So the question is, can you make, so A is an array of dogs, which is of size 5, and then in the first cell, we're putting a new animal. So can an array of dogs hold an animal? The question is an animal a dog? No, it's backwards. The is-a relationship doesn't work here. An animal is a dog is not true. The other way around is true. So if you had an array of animals and you tried to put a dog in there, that's perfectly valid. All right, so the specific problem here is that you're trying to put a parent into a child, which is not allowed. All right, in B, we have an array of dogs, same thing, and we're trying to put a new dog into cell 0. And it looks like we're calling a constructor on dog, which we're passing it Molly, and it looks like that constructor would work. So B seems like that is a valid example. C, we have an array of animals, and we're trying to put a new dog into the animal array cell 0. That is valid. And D, we have an array of animals, and we are trying to put a new animal into cell 0. That is also valid in this particular case because animal is not declared abstract. It probably should be to be logical, but it is not. So as it stands, B, C, and D are all valid. I think this was a multi-select question where you had to choose all the ones that were valid. Oh, which one was polymorphism? Was that the question?
It should be C.
Yes, C is the only one that's polymorphic because you're putting a dog into an animal. So A is just flat out invalid. B is valid, but it's not polymorphic. You're putting a dog into a dog. This all sounds weird. D is also valid. You're just putting an animal in an animal. The only one that's polymorphic is C, where you're putting a dog in an animal. All right. Question 15, what is the output of the following code segment? So again, we have a class myNumber. It has a public int x is 3, and then we have a main class, which has a bunch of methods. All right, so skipping down to main and working backwards, we have an A, which is equal to 10. Again, this is a case where you need your sheet of paper. So you're going to write down A is equal to 10. You're going to write down B is equal to whatever you get back from method 1. All right, so let's find method 1. Method 1 takes in an integer, and it does a plus plus on whatever came in and returns that value. Okay, so method 1A is passing a 10 up there. All right, so remember, when you're passing a value to a method, you have to ask yourself, is this a primitive type or a complex type? Because it works differently. If you are passing a primitive type, a copy of the value is passed up to the method. And that's what's happening here because you're passing an integer which is primitive. So method 1 is going to get a copy of the value 10. So P1 up in method 1 is going to be equal to 10, but it's a copy. P1++ changes P1 to 11, which has no effect on A, and then we return 11. 11 then gets assigned to B. So at the end of the second line of main, A is equal to 10 and B is equal to 11. So when it prints out the first thing, you get A colon 10, B colon 11. All right, so then we move on to the next one. MyNum object 1 is equal to a new MyNum. All right, so we're making an object, and now we're passing that object to method 2. And remember, when you pass objects, it works differently. So method 2 gets the entire object MyNum. And anything that method 2 does to that object is persisted. So method 2 says P1, which is what it's calling the object, .x++. X started off as 3, so x is now equal to 4. And it has changed for everyone. Anyone who's looking at MyNum or P1 sees that x is now equal to 4. So down in the print statement, when it prints out C, it's going to print out the return back from that method, which returns back 4. And then when it prints out x, it's going to print out 4. So you get A 10, B 11, C 4, D 4. Okay? So when you're passing primitive types, make sure that you are passing a copy. Anything that happens in the method does not affect the original variable that was passed up. When you're passing an object, the actual object is passed. The example is when you pass an object to somebody, if they change it, write on it, do something to it, put a stain on it, and they give it back to you, the stain is actually there. Works that way in the real world, it works that way here as well.
Strings are the one exception to the complex data type, right? Because they're still passed by value.
Strings are the weird exception because they are passed by value, but they kind of work like they are passed by object, because if you change the string, it still kind of seems changed.
Okay. So would we get the same output if MyNum was private, like if it was private x3?
Yes, changing x to private in the definition of class MyNum, the only thing that that would do is it would make it not compile, because you would no longer be able to access x inside of the main class. So it wouldn't give you the same output, it would give you a compile error, but ignoring that, it would still work the same way. Yep.
So you can't.
Sorry, go on.
It's fine, you got it.
If you can you briefly explain the whole difference between the pass by value and pass by reference?
Yep, gladly. Okay, so the question is, can I please re-explain that? So basically, I'm going to draw on the screen here. We have an A, so I'm going to draw a little stack down at the bottom. Inside of main, we have an A, which is equal to 10, and we have a B, it's really hard to write sideways, which is equal to something we don't know yet. That looks more like a P than a 10. Okay, let's get an eraser. Yeah, this is working well. All right. Thank you, Screencastify. That was really, I think I did I do far? What happened? Okay, I don't care. All right, so just believe me that A is equal to 10. How do I even get out of this? Okay, there we go, back to this. A is equal to 10, so that's an equal sign, and this is a 1, and that's a 0. I'm just going to make that a little bit more clearer by drawing over it repeatedly. There we go. All right, so A is equal to 10 and B is equal to something. All right, so on the second line of code, B makes a call to method 1. All right, so method 1 pops onto the stack, and method 1 has a variable which it calls P1. And the way that this works, and just to be clear, I'm going to draw an arrow, we are calling this method here. The way that this works, because A is an integer, and it's expecting an integer to come in, and an integer is a primitive type, a copy of the value is passed up. They are completely independent and separate things. A copy is passed up. So P1 is given a copy of the value of A, which means that P1 starts off as a 10. Inside of that method, it asks me to increment P1. So it becomes 11, which just means that P1 changes to 11, but nothing happened to A because it was a copy. And then it returns P1, which means that we are going to set B equal to 11 because the return from method 1 is set to B. All right, so at the end of that, A is 10, B is 11. Life is good? All right, so that is pass by value. We are making a copy of the value and passing it over. What's different on the next one is, and I should have made a bigger box, so we're going to just extend my box over here. All right, I'm not going to erase that because we've all seen how bad that works, so we're just going to pretend that that has popped off the stack because it is now over and done with. So the next thing that happens is we create an object. The object is called obj1. So obj1 is an object, and that's drawn as a box down here in main, because objects can have multiple things inside of it. If we go up and we look at the definition for mynum, it has an x that's equal to 3. That x is inside of that box, and its current value is 3. All right, then we make a call to method 2. So a new thing pops on the stack, which is a call to method 2, and what we pass it is the actual object. To method 2, it's going to call that P1. So P1, the way you should think about it is that it is just that. It's a connection down to the actual object. It's not a copy of the object, it's just a connection to the object. So then inside of the method 2, it says P1.x plus plus. If you take P1 and you follow it and you look for an x and you do a plus plus on it, that x is now equal to 4 because it was 3. And the important thing to see in this visual, which is just beautiful, is that the 4 is visible in all places. Not only did P1x get changed, but obj1's x also changed because it's an object. All right, so then it returns P1.x, which means it returns a 4 back. That 4 gets assigned to the C, and then it prints out 4 because of the C, and then it actually prints out obj1's x, which is also 4. So this illustrates very clearly the difference between passing a primitive type and passing an object. And if that is not something that made sense to you, go back and rewatch that video. There's a whole video on it. Because that is very important and you definitely need to understand it. The exact question you get may be different than that, but it will be something along this line where it's going to prove that you understand how to pass the 2 different types. Good? Did you think of the second half of your question, or was that good? Yeah.
Oh, no,
he got it?
yeah, he asked what I was going to ask.
Okay, cool. All right. Question number 16. What is the output of the following code? We have class A, we have class B, and down at the bottom, we instantiate a new B on a variable of type A. And again, we have an override. This looks very similar to the previous thing, so we're just going to run through this one quickly. So what we are creating is a variable called obj1, which is of type A, and then we're making a new B on top of it. And so when we call obj1.method1, it's going to check, first off, the compiler is going to check that A has a method 1. And it looks like A does indeed have a method 1, so the compiler is happy and this code is going to compile. Then it tries to run method 1. Since obj1 has currently a B on it, it will look to B to see if there's an override of method 1, which there is, and it will run that one, which will print out a 2. So this code will print out the number 2. All right. Which of the following statements are valid? A constructor can return an integer. That is not valid. Constructors do not return anything. As a matter of fact, that is one of the defining principles of a constructor, is that there is no return type. The constructor's name must match the name of the class, and there cannot be a return type. You can't even say void. It cannot have a return type, period. So a constructor cannot return an integer. A constructor cannot return a character. A constructor cannot return anything is clear, and a constructor can return a void is not true. It cannot return anything. It can't even have a return type, even if it's a void. All right? You can put a return statement in a constructor is true, but it cannot return a value. So there cannot be a value after the return statement. The return statement would cause the constructor to end when it reaches that line of code, and anything below it would never fire. It would be an odd circumstance to do it, but it is plausible. All right, what does the following code output? So we have an array of letters that is of size 5. Into cell 0, we put an A. Into cell 1, we put a B. C gets into 2, D into 3, and E into 4. We then have a string, which is called X, which starts off as an empty string, double quote, double quote. And so then we have for I equals 4, I greater than or equal to 2, sorry, I minus minus. All right, so this is definitely a find yourself a piece of paper. All right, so you're going to need to draw what the array looks like. Sure, that sounds great. And so we had an A, a B, a C, a D, and an E. And all of those are obviously in their own cells. All right, that's cell 0, that's 1, that's 2, that's 3, and that's 4. All right, we have a J. We're going to keep track of the J up here. Sorry, it's an I, it's not a J. Ugh. All right, I starts off life as the number 4. Okay, so it says X plus equals letters at position I. Okay, so the first thing is X is a string. So if you do a plus equals on a string, what happens? You're going to add things onto the end of the string. The string is currently empty, so a plus equals is going to add something onto the string. The thing it's going to add on is letters at position 4, which is going to be an E. All right? The loop tells it to decrement I. I goes from 4 down to 3, and we check the terminating condition. 3 greater than or equal to 2 is valid. So it's now going to take whatever is in letters at position 3, which is a D, and it's going to add it on to the end of the string. All right, we're going to decrement I. It's going to become 2, because that's what the loop tells us to do. 2 greater than or equal to 2 is still true, so it's now going to add on a C. We're going to decrement I. It becomes 1, and 1 greater than or equal to 2 is no longer true, so the loop exits. When we print out X, we're going to get EDC. Okay, so this is testing that you understand arrays, how to insert and take things out of it. It's testing that you understand how a for loop works, and make sure you read the question. That for loop, you might have immediately thought it was starting at 0 and going to 4, and that's not at all what it's doing. It's starting at 4 and it's going to 2. Make sure you read the equals in that greater than or equal to. All right, and then you've got some various options there. All right, I realize we are almost out of time in the room. I'm going to finish this off, so if you want to stay, you're welcome to. If you need to go, head out. All right, so question number 19. What does the following code output? Also, good luck on the test next week if you are heading out. You guys are going to do great. The only rule is you have to beat the other sections. Very important. The average in here has to be higher than the other sections, so don't let me down. All right, question number 19. What does the following code output? We have an X, which is equal to 10. All right, so this is, again, another one of these things where you're going to want to start off and keep track of a bunch of things. So we're going to have an X. It's equal to 10. All right, so it says while 10 is greater than 2, that's obviously true. It's going to subtract 2 from the X, which means the X immediately changes to an 8, and then it's going to print out that X. So that's going to give me an 8. Then we're going to go around the loop again. Is 8 greater than 2? The answer is yes, it's still greater than 2, so we're going to take 2 off it. That's going to give me a 6, so it's going to print out the 6. We're going to go back up to the top. Is 6 greater than 2? Yes, it is. So that's going to drop down to 4 because of the X minus equals 2. That's going to print out a 4, so 8, 6, 4. We're going to go back up to the top. Is 4 greater than 2? Yes, it is. So we're going to do an X minus equals 2, which means it's now equal to 2. And then it's going to print out the 2. All right, at this point, it is going to go back to the top of the loop. Is 2 greater than 2? The answer is no, so the loop is going to stop. So the output here was 8, 6, 4, 2, which appears to be the first answer. That is not how you move in the screen. All right. All right, our last question, which is question number 20 in here. I hate you so much, new version of Screencastify. It is very amusing. All right, I will find a way to put fireworks on your test. No, I won't. A method with a return type of void may still have a return statement in its code. And the answer to that is yes, it absolutely may. Even though the method is false, you may absolutely have a return statement. You cannot have a value after the return statement, but you may have a return statement. Return does two things. It immediately ends the method that it is in, and if there is a value after it, it returns that value to the calling method. But if it's just there by itself and there is no value after it, then it just immediately ends it. And it is quite often the case that in the middle of your code, you just want the method to suddenly stop. And in that case, you would put a return statement in there with no value after it, even though the method is declared void. So this is absolutely true.
Is it going to be using recursion?
Is that going to be used in recursion? Yes, that is sometimes used in recursion. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so that is the example test. Those are the types of questions you're going to get. The topics that are covered are modules 1, 2, and 3. Again, there's another practice test in your D2L shell. It is a coding test, but it is still a valid test for you, because if you can't write it, you're going to have a hard time on the test because, well, it covers the same material. So there is no coding questions on the test. You must take it during your time that is allocated, which I went over at the beginning of the video and at the beginning of the class. And you guys are going to knock it out of the park. You guys are going to do great. Yeah, question? I'm going to post the video and the document that I was working out of. Yep. Yeah.
Are we allowed to use paper?
You are allowed to use paper. Yeah, absolutely. You can bring one sheet of paper and a pen or pencil with you. Yep. All right, any other questions? All right, for those in the video file, make sure that you know when your test is. Go back and look at the schedule, and good luck.